I had been with Holloway Manufacturing for 32 years when the new CEO walked through our doors that cold January morning. His name was Clayton, and he arrived with the kind of confidence that comes from never having been told no. He was 43, fresh from a tech startup that had gone public the year before, and he had very specific ideas about how a century-old industrial manufacturing company should operate in what he called the modern landscape. I was 57 years old, head of procurement and supply chain operations. I had built relationships with suppliers across 3 continents. I knew which steel mill in Pittsburgh could turn around an emergency order in 48 hours, which plastics manufacturer in Ohio would give us priority during peak season, and which shipping company would reroute a container mid-ocean if we needed a component yesterday. My knowledge was not written in any manual. It lived in my head, in my contacts, in 3 decades of handshakes and kept promises. The first company meeting happened on a Wednesday. Clayton stood at the front of our main conference room, a space that still smelled faintly of the coffee and pastries someone had set out that morning. 85 employees packed into chairs and lined the walls. I sat in my usual spot, 3rd row from the front, next to Barbara from accounting and Tom from quality control. I want to start by acknowledging the history of this company, Clayton began, his voice carrying that particular blend of enthusiasm and condescension that younger executives often mistake for leadership. 103 years is impressive, but history does not pay the bills. Innovation does. Efficiency does. And that means making hard choices about how we operate going forward. He clicked through his presentation, slides filled with graphs and buzzwords. Digital transformation, automated procurement systems, artificial intelligence integration, machine learning optimization. Each phrase landed like a small stone in my stomach, but I kept my expression neutral. I had survived 4 previous leadership changes. I knew how to wait out the storm. We are implementing a new procurement platform, Clayton continued. It will use algorithms to predict our supply needs, automatically generate purchase orders, and optimize our vendor relationships based on price and delivery metrics. The system goes live in 6 weeks. Barbara leaned over and whispered, "Does he know we already have vendor management software?" I nodded slightly but said nothing. This was not about improving what we had. This was about Clayton proving he could revolutionize a company that had been profitable for longer than he had been alive. After the meeting, I returned to my office on the 3rd floor. The window overlooked the manufacturing floor, where I could see workers moving between the massive stamping presses and assembly lines. We made industrial components for construction equipment, agricultural machinery, and commercial transportation. Nothing glamorous, but essential. The kind of work that kept the country running. My phone rang. It was Douglas, one of our oldest suppliers. His family had owned a specialty bolt manufacturing operation in Pennsylvania for 4 generations. "Rose, I just got an automated email about rebidding our contract," he said, confusion clear in his voice. "We have been working together for 28 years. What is happening?" "New system," I said carefully. "Let me make some calls and get back to you." But I knew what was happening. Clayton was feeding every supplier relationship into his new platform, reducing decades of partnership to data points and price comparisons. The system did not know that Douglas had once driven through a blizzard to personally deliver an emergency shipment when our entire production line was at risk. It did not know that certain suppliers were worth paying an extra 2% because they never failed when it mattered most. I spent the rest of that week trying to explain these nuances to Clayton. He listened with the patient smile of someone who has already made up his mind. "Rose, I appreciate your institutional knowledge," he said during our Friday meeting in his office. The space had been redecorated since he arrived. The former CEO's oak desk was gone, replaced by a glass and chrome monstrosity that probably cost more than my annual salary. "But the data shows we can reduce procurement costs by 18% with the new system. That is real money. The data does not show what happens when a supplier falls through," I said. "When you need someone to prioritize your order over someone else, you need relationships, not algorithms." "Then we will build redundancy into the system," he replied smoothly. multiple vendors for each component. Let them compete for our business. I left his office knowing I had lost that argument, but I was not prepared for what came next. 2 weeks later, our department manager, Kyle, called me into his office. He was 36, had been with the company for 5 years, and had been promoted to manage our department 6 months ago. Before Clayton arrived, Kyle and I had worked well together. He valued my experience. He asked my opinion, but something had shifted in the past week. "Rose, we need to talk about your position," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. The words hung in the air between us like smoke. Kyle shifted in his chair, adjusting his tie unnecessarily. Through his office window, I could see my desk, the same desk I had occupied for 3 decades, the same spot where I had negotiated million-dollar contracts, solved supply chain crises, and built the procurement operation from a 2-person department into a strategic business function. "Clayton wants to restructure the department," Kyle continued. "The new automated system is going to handle most of the procurement functions. We are going to need fewer people managing the process." "I trained that system," I said quietly. "I spent the last 6 weeks inputting every supplier relationship, every specification, every preference and exception into that platform." "I know, and we appreciate that. But going forward, we need people who can manage the technology. People who understand machine learning and predictive analytics." "I understand those things," I said, hearing my voice rise slightly despite my effort to stay calm. "I took those courses you recommended. I completed the certification program in supply chain automation." Kyle finally looked at me directly. "Rose, this is not about your willingness to learn. This is about the direction the company is moving. Clayton wants a younger, more tech-focused team." The words he did not say hung between us just as heavily as the ones he did. Too old. Not adaptable enough. Obsolete. "How long do I have?" I asked. 2 weeks. We are offering you a severance package, 3 months' salary plus your accumulated vacation time. It is actually quite generous considering you are already vested in your pension. I stood up slowly, feeling every one of my 57 years in my knees and back. "I would like that in writing, please." "Of course. Human Resources will send over the paperwork this afternoon." I walked back to my desk in a daze. Barbara noticed immediately. "What happened?" she asked, standing up from her nearby cubicle. "I am being let go," I said simply. "Automation is taking over my job." Barbara's face went pale. "They cannot do that. You are the only reason this department functions." "They can, and they are." Word spread quickly through the office. By lunch, a dozen colleagues had stopped by my desk to express their shock and sympathy. Tom from Quality Control looked genuinely angry. "This is insane," he said. "You saved us 6 figures last year when that titanium supplier went bankrupt. You found us a new source in 72 hours. "The system will handle situations like that now," I said, though I did not believe it. "The system does not have your phone numbers. It does not know who to call when everything is falling apart." He was right, but it did not matter. Clayton had made his decision, and Kyle had gone along with it. I was expendable. Ancient history in a company that suddenly wanted to forget its past. That evening, I sat in my living room with a glass of wine and read through the severance package. The legal language was dense, but the message was clear. Sign this, take your money, and go away quietly. There was a non-disparagement clause, a confidentiality agreement, and a waiver of any potential age discrimination claims. I thought about calling a lawyer. I thought about fighting. But I was tired. 32 years tired. And part of me wondered if maybe they were right. Maybe I was obsolete. Maybe the world had moved on and I had failed to notice. My phone buzzed with a text from my daughter Lauren. She was 31, working as a marketing director in Seattle. We spoke every Sunday. "Mom, are you okay? I just had the weirdest feeling that something was wrong." I typed back quickly. All fine here. Just a long day at work. Talk on Sunday? I did not want to tell her yet. Did not want to admit that I had been discarded like an outdated piece of equipment. She would be angry on my behalf, and I could not handle that yet. The next morning, I arrived at the office early. I had always been an early riser, usually at my desk by 7 in the morning. But the building felt different now, like I was already a ghost haunting my former life. I started going through my files, beginning the process of documenting everything that existed only in my head. The system might have data, but it did not have context. It did not know that our Brazilian supplier needed orders placed before noon their time to guarantee next-day processing. It did not know that our warehouse manager in Tennessee was actually more reliable than the one in Georgia, even though the Georgia facility was closer. It did not know that when the steel mill in Cleveland said 3 weeks, they really meant 4, but the one in Pittsburgh said 4 and delivered in 3. I wrote it all down. Page after page of institutional knowledge that had never been formally recorded. I told myself I was doing it for whoever came after me. For the young, tech-savvy replacement who would learn these lessons the hard way when the system failed and they had no idea who to call. But really, I was doing it because I needed to believe that what I knew mattered. That 32 years of experience could not be replaced by an algorithm and a spreadsheet. Clayton walked past my office that afternoon. He glanced in, saw me working, and kept walking without acknowledgement. To him, I was already gone, already erased from the future he was building. Kyle stopped by at the end of the day. How is the transition documentation coming? It will be ready by my last day, I said. Good. We really do appreciate everything you have done for this company, Rose. The words sounded hollow, scripted, the kind of thing you say to someone you are discarding. My last day arrived faster than I expected. 13 days of sorting through decades of work, transferring knowledge that could not really be transferred, and trying to maintain dignity while everyone around me knew I'd been pushed out. There was no goodbye party. No gathering in the conference room with cake and speeches. Kyle sent an email to the department on Thursday afternoon, announcing that Friday would be my last day, and thanking me for my years of service. Aww. The phrase made me sound like a piece of machinery that had finally worn out. Friday morning, I packed my personal belongings into 2 cardboard boxes, photographs of Lauren at various ages, a coffee mug she had given me that said, "World's Best Mom," a small plant that had survived on my desk for 8 years, the accumulated debris of a professional life reduced to 2 boxes and a rolling cart. Barbara cried when she hugged me goodbye. Tom looked furious. A few other colleagues stopped by with awkward well wishes and promises to stay in touch that we both knew were unlikely to be kept. At 10 o'clock, Kyle called me into his office one final time. Clayton was there too, standing by the window with his hands in his pockets. He turned when I entered, and for a moment, I thought he might say something meaningful, acknowledge what I had contributed, show some recognition of what he was losing. "Rose, we wanted to see you off personally," Clayton said. "I want you to know that this decision was purely business, nothing personal." "Of course," I said evenly. "Business is business." "The reality is that your position has simply become obsolete in the modern manufacturing environment," he continued, warming to his subject. "We need people who can adapt to automation, who understand that artificial intelligence and machine learning are the future. The days of managing supplier relationships through personal connections are over. It is all about data analytics and algorithmic optimization now." Kyle shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. He had thrown his lot in with Clayton, and now he had to live with it. "I understand completely," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "You have to do what you think is best for the company." "Exactly," Clayton said, clearly pleased that I was being so reasonable. He probably expected tears or anger or some dramatic scene he would have to manage. "And I am sure someone with your experience will have no trouble finding something new, maybe consulting work or part-time positions, something less demanding." The condescension was breathtaking. He genuinely believed he was being kind, helping me understand that my career was over, so I could move gracefully into irrelevance. "Is there anything else?" I asked. "Just the exit paperwork," Kyle said, sliding a folder across the desk. "Sign at the tabs, and Human Resources will process your final paycheck and severance." I signed without reading. I had already reviewed everything with my lawyer, who had advised me that fighting would be expensive and probably futile. Age discrimination is notoriously difficult to prove, and the severance package, while not generous, was enough to discourage litigation. I handed the folder back to Kyle. "I wish you both the best of luck with the new system." "Thank you," Clayton said. "And Rose? No hard feelings, right?" "It is just business. You know how it is." "No hard feelings at all," I said, meeting his eyes steadily. "Like you said, business is business." I walked out of his office, collected my boxes, and left Holloway Manufacturing for the last time. It was 11:30 in the morning. I had nowhere else to be. I drove home in silence, not trusting myself to turn on the radio or even think too deeply about what had just happened. My house was empty. My daughter was across the country. My ex-husband had remarried 5 years ago and moved to Florida. I had work friends, but those relationships had always been tied to the job. Without the job, I was not sure what they were. I set the boxes on my kitchen table and stared at them. 2 boxes, 32 years. My phone rang. Unknown number. I almost did not answer, but something made me pick up. "Is this Rose?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes. Who is calling?" "My name is Patricia. I am the Chief Operating Officer at Grantham Industrial. Your name came up in a conversation I had yesterday, and I was hoping we might talk." Grantham Industrial. I knew the name immediately. They were one of the largest industrial equipment manufacturers in the United States, with facilities in 12 states and international operations in 6 countries. More importantly, they were Holloway Manufacturing's biggest client. They accounted for nearly 40% of Holloway's annual revenue. "I am listening," I said carefully. "We have been having some issues with Holloway lately. Quality problems, delivery delays, inconsistent communication. Our purchasing director mentioned that you used to run their procurement and supply chain operations. We are looking for someone who understands complex manufacturing supply chains and has deep industry relationships. Would you be interested in discussing a position?" My heart started beating faster. "What kind of position?" "Senior Supplier Relationship Manager. You would be responsible for managing our key vendor relationships, ensuring quality and delivery standards, and serving as our primary liaison with critical suppliers, including Holloway Manufacturing." I closed my eyes and took a long breath. The universe had just handed me something I had not even known to ask for. "I would be very interested in discussing this further," I said. "Excellent. Can you come to our headquarters in Chicago on Monday? I would like you to meet with our executive team." "I can be there." "Perfect. I will have my assistant send you the details." "And Rose? I have heard very good things about your work. I think you would be an excellent fit for our organization." After we hung up, I sat very still in my kitchen, staring at those 2 boxes on my table. Then slowly, I started to smile. The Grantham Industrial headquarters occupied 15 floors of a glass tower in downtown Chicago. I arrived Monday morning at 9, wearing my best navy suit and carrying a portfolio that contained 3 decades worth of industry contacts, supplier evaluations, and case studies of supply chain problems I had solved. Patricia met me in the lobby herself. She was perhaps 60 years old, with silver hair cut in a sharp bob, and the kind of presence that comes from earning respect, rather than demanding it. We shook hands, and I felt some of the tension I had been carrying since Friday begin to ease. "Thank you for coming on such short notice," she said as we rode the elevator to the 14th floor. "We have been dealing with some significant supplier issues, and your name kept coming up as someone who might be able to help us navigate them." "Who recommended me?" I asked. Douglas, actually. The bolt manufacturer in Pennsylvania. We use him for some of our specialty fasteners. And when I mentioned we were having problems with Holloway, he said you were the best procurement person he had ever worked with. Said you had just left Holloway, and we would be fools not to hire you immediately. I felt a rush of gratitude toward Douglas. He had not just given me a reference. He had opened a door I had not even known existed. The interview lasted 3 hours. I met with Patricia, the chief procurement officer named James, and the senior vice president of operations, a woman named Helen. They walked me through their current supplier challenges, showed me data on delivery failures and quality issues, and asked detailed questions about my experience managing complex manufacturing relationships. What they did not say directly, but what became clear through context, was that Holloway Manufacturing was failing them. Deliveries that used to arrive on schedule were now delayed. Components that used to meet specifications were now generating quality rejections. Communication that used to be proactive was now defensive and reactive. When did these problems start? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. About 6 weeks ago, James said. Right around the time they implemented some new procurement system. We used to work primarily with you, actually. Then suddenly everything went through automated channels and customer service representatives who did not seem to understand our requirements. I nodded slowly. The new system does not account for custom specifications or relationship history. It treats every order as a standalone transaction. Can it be fixed? Helen asked. Not quickly. The system needs to learn, and that takes time and data. Meanwhile, you need components that meet your specifications and arrive on schedule. Patricia leaned forward. Could you manage that relationship for us? Be our point person with Holloway and make sure they deliver what we need? I could, I said carefully. But you should know that I just left Holloway last Friday. I was let go as part of their restructuring. They might see my involvement as a conflict of interest. You were let go? James looked genuinely shocked. You were the only person there who seemed to understand manufacturing supply chains. The new CEO wanted to modernize operations. I was considered obsolete. Patricia and Helen exchanged a look I could not quite read. Then Patricia smiled, and it was not a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who had just been handed an unexpected advantage. Rose, how would you feel about being the person who manages our entire relationship with Holloway, including contract negotiations, performance standards, and delivery requirements? I understood what she was really asking. How would I feel about having power over the company that had just discarded me? I would be very comfortable with that, I said. Excellent. James, can you pull up the Holloway contract? James typed on his laptop, and a document appeared on the large monitor mounted on the conference room wall. It was a 3-year supply agreement worth approximately $42 million annually. The contract was up for renewal in 60 days. Holloway has been assuming we would renew automatically, Patricia said. We have been working with them for 8 years, but given the recent performance issues, we are considering other options. We would need someone who could evaluate whether Holloway can fix their problems or whether we need to transition to alternative suppliers. The implications were staggering. If Grantham walked away from that $42 million contract, it would devastate Holloway's revenue. Clayton's entire restructuring plan was built on maintaining their current client base while cutting costs. Losing their largest customer would be catastrophic. I would need complete authority to manage the relationship, I said, including the ability to set performance standards and make recommendations about contract renewal. You would have it, Patricia said, assuming you accept our offer. She slid a folder across the table. Inside was an offer letter. The salary was 30% higher than what I had been making at Holloway. The benefits were better. The title was Senior Director of Strategic Supplier Relations. I looked at the number again, making sure I had not misread it. Then I looked at Patricia. When would you want me to start? Is tomorrow too soon? She asked. I signed the offer letter right there in the conference room. Patricia shook my hand again, and this time her smile was warm and genuine. Welcome to Grantham, Rose. I think you are going to do excellent things here. I flew back to Cleveland that evening in a daze. Everything had shifted so quickly. 4 days ago, I had been packing boxes and feeling obsolete. Now I was walking into a position with real authority and the chance to prove that experience and relationships still mattered. But more than that, I was walking into a position where I would be directly responsible for evaluating the company that had thrown me away, where I would have the power to determine whether Clayton's vision of automated efficiency could actually deliver what he had promised. I spent Tuesday morning setting up my home office for remote work. Grantham had offices across the country, and Patricia had agreed I could work from Cleveland and travel to Chicago as needed. By noon, I had access to their systems, email, and complete files on all their key suppliers. The Holloway file was extensive. 8 years of orders, delivery records, quality reports, and communications. I could see exactly when things had started to deteriorate. 6 weeks ago, right when Clayton's new system went live, delivery times began stretching. Quality rejection rates doubled. Customer service response times tripled. Wednesday morning, I sent my first official communication as Grantham's Senior Director of Strategic Supplier Relations. It was addressed to Kyle, my former manager, with a copy to Clayton. Dear Kyle, I am writing to introduce myself as Grantham Industrial's new point of contact for all matters related to our supply relationship with Holloway Manufacturing. Going forward, all communications regarding orders, specifications, delivery schedules, and quality issues should be directed to me. I would like to schedule a call this week to discuss some performance concerns we have identified. Please let me know your availability. Best regards, Rose. I used my new email signature, which included my title and Grantham's logo. I kept the tone professional and impersonal. Just business. Kyle called me within an hour. I could hear the confusion in his voice. Rose, I just got your email. You are working for Grantham now? As of Tuesday, yes. I am managing their strategic supplier relationships. That was fast. I was fortunate to find the right opportunity, I said evenly. But that is not why I called. We need to discuss some significant performance issues we have been experiencing with Holloway deliveries. Performance issues? What kind of issues? I pulled up my spreadsheet and began reading data. In the past 6 weeks, 23% of your deliveries have been late. Quality rejection rates have increased from 2% to 4.7%. Our customer service inquiries are taking an average of 48 hours to receive responses, compared to 4 hours previously. These numbers are not acceptable. There was a long silence. Then Kyle said, The new system is still learning. There have been some transition challenges. I understand transitions take time. However, Grantham's production schedules depend on reliable component delivery. We need to see immediate improvement, or we will have to consider alternative suppliers. Alternative suppliers? Kyle's voice rose slightly. Rose, we have been working together for 8 years, and for 7 of those years performance was excellent, but something changed 6 weeks ago, and we need it fixed. Another silence. I could almost hear him thinking, trying to figure out what to say. Finally, he asked, Do you want to talk to Clayton about this? I think that would be appropriate. Can you set up a call for tomorrow? I will see what I can do. He hung up, sounding shaken. I sat back in my chair and allowed myself a small smile. This was just the beginning. Clayton called me directly Thursday morning. No preliminaries, no small talk. Rose, Kyle tells me you are working for Grantham now. That is correct. And you are threatening to pull their contract? I am not threatening anything. I am identifying performance issues that need to be addressed. Your delivery and quality metrics have declined significantly since you implemented your new procurement system. The system is fine. We are just working through some initial calibration issues. Then I suggest you work through them quickly. Grantham's contract is up for renewal in 57 days, and our executive team is evaluating whether Holloway can meet our requirements going forward. Clayton's tone shifted, became harder. This seems like a conflict of interest. You left Holloway just last week, and now you are trying to damage our relationship with our largest client. I did not leave, Clayton. I was fired. You told me I was obsolete, that automation could do my job better than I could. Now I am in a position to evaluate whether that is true. This is not personal. It is just business. You understand how it is. I heard him take a sharp breath. Heard the moment when he realized that his own words were being used against him. What do you want? He asked finally. I want you to fix your delivery and quality problems. I want response times back to acceptable levels. I want the performance we were getting before you decided to automate everything. We can do that. Good. I will be conducting a formal supplier evaluation in 3 weeks. I will need to meet with your team, review your processes, and assess whether you have the capability to meet our long-term requirements. I will send over the evaluation criteria by end of business today. 3 weeks is not much time. Then I suggest you prioritize it. Grantham represents $42 million of annual revenue for Holloway. I imagine your board would not be pleased if you lost that contract in your first 6 months as CEO. I could hear the fury in his voice when he responded, barely controlled. Fine. Send over your criteria. We will be ready. I hung up and immediately called Patricia to update her on the conversation. How did he take it? She asked. About as well as you would expect. He is angry, but he knows he cannot afford to lose your contract. Do you think he can actually fix the problems? I considered the question carefully. The problems are fixable, but not with the system he has in place. He would need to override the automation, bring back manual intervention, and rebuild supplier relationships. That means admitting his entire restructuring strategy was flawed. Will he do that? Not unless he has no other choice. He is committed to proving that automation works. His reputation depends on it. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Rose, I want to be clear about something. I did not hire you to get revenge on Holloway. I hired you because we need someone who can manage complex supplier relationships and ensure we get the components we need. If Clayton can fix these problems and deliver what we require, then we should continue working with them. I understand, I said, and I agree. This is not about revenge. It is about performance and capability. But even as I said it, I knew that revenge was part of it. Not the driving force, but a satisfying side benefit. Clayton had thrown me away like garbage. Now I was in a position to show him exactly what he had lost. Over the next 2 weeks, I worked with James and the Grantham procurement team to develop a comprehensive supplier evaluation framework. It covered everything from technical capability to quality management systems, to relationship management and communication protocols. It was thorough, detailed, and demanding. I sent the framework to Kyle with a note that the on-site evaluation would take place in 2 weeks. I would be bringing a team from Grantham, and we would need access to their facilities, their systems, and their senior leadership. The evaluation was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in early March. I drove to Holloway Manufacturing with James and 2 quality engineers from Grantham. We arrived at 9 o'clock sharp and checked in at the reception desk. Kyle met us in the lobby. He looked exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes and a tie that was slightly crooked. He shook hands with everyone, his grip lingering on mine for just a moment longer than necessary. Thank you for coming, he said. We have prepared a full presentation on our quality management processes and recent performance improvements. I would prefer to start with a facility tour, I said. I want to see your actual operations, not just presentations. Kyle hesitated, then nodded. Of course. Let me get Clayton. He wanted to be part of the tour. We waited in the lobby for 10 minutes before Clayton appeared. He was wearing an expensive suit and a smile that did not reach his eyes. He shook hands with James and the engineers, then turned to me. Rose, good to see you again, he said, as if we were old colleagues meeting for lunch. Thank you for accommodating our evaluation, I replied neutrally. We walked through the manufacturing floor, and I could see immediately that things had changed. The floor seemed less organized than I remembered. Workers looked stressed. There were more safety incidents posted on the bulletin boards than there used to be. I stopped at one of the stamping press stations and spoke to the operator, a man named Frank, who had been with the company for 20 years. "How are things going, Frank?" I asked. He glanced at Clayton before answering. "Fine, Rose. Good to see you." "Having any trouble with component deliveries?" Another glance at Clayton. "Sometimes things run a little behind schedule." "How far behind?" "Depends. Sometimes a few days, sometimes a week or more." Clayton interjected smoothly. "We have been working through some supply chain optimization. There have been minor delays, but nothing that has significantly impacted production." I made a note on my tablet. James asked several technical questions about quality control processes, and Kyle answered them with increasing nervousness. We moved through the facility, and at each station, I saw small signs of deterioration. Inventory piling up because components were late. Workers compensating for quality issues. Systems that used to run smoothly now showing stress fractures. After the tour, we assembled in the main conference room for Clayton's presentation. He had clearly spent significant time preparing it. Slides full of data showing improved efficiency metrics, cost savings, and system optimization. He spoke with confidence about the future of automated procurement and how Holloway was leading the industry in innovation. When he finished, I opened my folder and pulled out a different set of data. Numbers I had compiled from Grantham's actual experience with Holloway over the past 2 months. "These are impressive projections," I said, "but they do not match our experience as your customer. Since your new system launched, we have seen a 28% increase in late deliveries, a 41% increase in quality rejections, and an 83% increase in customer service response times." Clayton's smile faltered. "Those numbers seem high. They are pulled directly from our order management system. I can provide detailed documentation if you would like to review it." James leaned forward. "What concerns us most is the trend line. Performance is not improving. It is getting worse. Last week, we had to shut down a production line for 6 hours because a critical component delivery was delayed. That cost us $83,000 in lost production time." "That was an isolated incident," Kyle said quickly. "We have implemented new protocols to prevent that from happening again." "What protocols?" I asked. "Because according to your own data, you had 4 similar incidents in the past month with other customers." Kyle went pale. "How do you know that?" "I still have relationships in this industry. People talk to people they trust. And what I am hearing is that Holloway is struggling to maintain the service levels you used to provide." Clayton stood abruptly. "Rose, can I speak with you privately for a moment?" I nodded and followed him out of the conference room to his office. He closed the door and turned to face me, his earlier composure completely gone. "What exactly are you trying to do here?" he demanded. "I am evaluating a supplier relationship," I said calmly. "That is my job. This is personal. You are angry that I let you go, so now you are trying to destroy this company." "I am not trying to destroy anything. I am trying to determine whether Holloway can meet Grantham's requirements. So far, the evidence suggests you cannot. You know these systems take time to optimize. You know there are always transition issues. I also know that you fired the one person who could have helped you manage that transition smoothly. You told me I was obsolete. That automation could do my job better than I could. So far, automation is failing spectacularly." Clayton stared at me, his jaw clenched. "What do you want? Do you want an apology? Do you want me to admit I made a mistake?" "I do not want anything from you personally, Clayton. But Grantham wants reliable component deliveries, acceptable quality standards, and responsive customer service. Can you provide that, or should we start transitioning to alternative suppliers?" "We can provide it. Then do it. You have 30 days to show measurable improvement. If your performance metrics are not back to acceptable levels by then, I will recommend that Grantham terminate your contract and move our business elsewhere." I walked out of his office without waiting for a response. James and the engineers were waiting in the hallway, looking uncomfortable. "Everything all right?" James asked quietly. "Everything is fine," I said. "Let's finish our evaluation and get back to Chicago. I have seen everything I need to see." The drive back to Chicago was quiet. James sat in the passenger seat reviewing notes on his tablet, while the engineers discussed technical specifications in the back. I focused on the road and thought about what I had seen at Holloway. The cracks in the foundation were bigger than I had expected. Clayton had not just implemented a flawed system. He had dismantled something that worked and replaced it with something fundamentally broken. "What are you thinking?" James asked, breaking the silence. "I am thinking that they have a month to fix problems that will take at least 3 months to address properly," I said. "The system is not just poorly calibrated, it is the wrong tool for what they need." "So we move to alternative suppliers?" "Maybe. I want to give them a fair chance. But I also want to make sure we have backup options ready if they fail." Over the next week, I worked with Patricia and James to identify potential alternative suppliers for each major component category that Holloway provided. I reached out to contacts across the industry, including Douglas in Pennsylvania, and several others I had worked with over the decades. Everyone was willing to help. Many of them had heard what happened at Holloway, and were not surprised the company was struggling. "Clayton is trying to run a manufacturing supply chain like it is a software company," Douglas told me during one conversation. "He does not understand that relationships matter in this business, that trust and history count for something." "He is learning that lesson now," I said. "Not fast enough from what I hear. Word is spreading that Holloway is unreliable. They are going to lose more than just your contract if they do not fix things quickly." I shared that intelligence with Patricia during our weekly strategy meeting. She listened carefully, then asked the question I had been expecting. "Rose, I need you to be honest with me. Are you being objective about Holloway, or is this personal?" I considered my answer carefully. "It started personal. When you first called me, I saw an opportunity to prove that Clayton made a mistake firing me. But the more I have looked at their operations, the more I realize this is bigger than my hurt feelings. They genuinely cannot deliver what you need right now. Their system is broken, and Clayton is too proud to admit it. What would you recommend if this was any other supplier? If you had no history with them?" "I would recommend a 60-day transition plan to move critical components to alternative suppliers while keeping Holloway on for less critical items. Then I would give them 6 months to prove they can recover. If they do, we gradually increase their volume again. If they do not, we phase them out completely." Patricia nodded slowly. "That is exactly the recommendation I was hoping you would make. It is fair, it protects our interests, and it gives them a chance to recover if they can figure things out." 2 weeks after our evaluation visit, Kyle called me. His voice sounded strained. "Rose, we need to talk about the 30-day deadline. We have made some improvements, but we are still not where we need to be. Is there any flexibility on the timeline?" "What kind of improvements?" I asked. "We have reduced late deliveries by 12%. Quality rejections are down slightly. Customer service response times are better." "Those are improvements, but you are still performing significantly worse than you were before the new system launched. What is your plan to close that gap?" Kyle was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Clayton is bringing in consultants, external experts who specialize in procurement automation. They think they can optimize the system within 60 days. 60 days is beyond our deadline." "I know. But Rose, if we lose the Grantham contract, this company is in serious trouble. We built our entire growth strategy around maintaining our current customer base. Losing $42 million in annual revenue would force us to lay off a third of our workforce." I felt a pang of sympathy for Kyle. He was not a bad person. He had just chosen to align himself with the wrong leader. But sympathy did not change the reality. "Kyle, I understand the position you are in, but my responsibility is to Grantham, not to Holloway. We need reliable suppliers. If you cannot provide that, we have to look elsewhere." Can you at least recommend a 60-day extension? Give us time to work with these consultants? I can present that option to my leadership team, but I need something in return. I need complete transparency into your operations, weekly performance reports, direct access to your system data. And I need Clayton to acknowledge that there are fundamental problems that require immediate attention. I can probably get you the reports and the data access. The acknowledgement from Clayton might be harder. Then maybe you should tell him what the stakes are. Tell him that his pride is about to cost Holloway their largest customer and a third of their workforce. I hung up and immediately drafted a memo to Patricia, outlining Kyle's request for an extension and my recommended conditions. Patricia read it over lunch and agreed to the approach. 60 days, but only if they give us complete visibility and show measurable weekly progress, she said. And Rose, I want you to be the one who delivers this message to Clayton. I think it will be more effective coming from you. I called Clayton that afternoon and asked for a meeting. He suggested a video conference, but I insisted on meeting in person. Some conversations needed to happen face to face. I arrived at Holloway Manufacturing on a Thursday morning. The receptionist recognized me and smiled uncomfortably as she directed me to Clayton's office. I walked through hallways I had walked through for 3 decades, past cubicles where former colleagues glanced up and then quickly looked away. Clayton's door was open. He was on his phone, but he waved me in when he saw me. I sat in one of the leather chairs facing his desk and waited while he finished his call. "Rose," he said when he hung up, "I appreciate you coming in person. Kyle said you might be willing to extend our deadline." "Grantham is willing to consider an extension under specific conditions," I said. "But before we discuss that, I need to understand something. Do you recognize that your current system is not working?" Clayton's expression hardened. "The system is working fine. We are just experiencing normal transition difficulties." "Clayton, your delivery performance is down 28%. Your quality rejections have doubled. You are bleeding customers. That is not normal transition difficulty. That is system failure. It is optimization in progress. It is denial," I said flatly. "And that denial is going to destroy this company if you do not change course." He stood up abruptly and walked to his window, looking out at the manufacturing floor below. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, without turning around, he spoke. "Do you know what it is like to be brought in as the person who is supposed to save a struggling company? To have everyone watching, waiting to see if you can actually deliver the results you promised? I know what it is like to spend 32 years building something and then be told it has no value," I replied. "I know what it is like to be discarded because someone decided you were obsolete." He turned to face me. "That was not personal, Rose. I needed to cut costs and modernize operations. You were expensive and resistant to change. I was experienced and cautious about implementing systems that were not ready. There is a difference. So now you are here to watch me fail? To prove that you were right and I was wrong? I am here to offer you a chance to fix your mistakes before it is too late. Grantham will extend your deadline to 60 days, but only under the following conditions. You provide weekly performance reports with complete transparency. You give us direct access to your system data so we can monitor improvements in real time. And you bring me in as a consultant to help you fix the relationship management problems your automation created." Clayton stared at me. "You want me to hire you as a consultant?" "I want you to accept help from someone who actually understands how manufacturing supply chains work. Someone who knows which relationships need to be rebuilt and how to rebuild them. You can keep your automated system, but you need human expertise to manage the exceptions and handle the complexity that algorithms cannot process. And if I refuse? Then Grantham begins transitioning to alternative suppliers next week, and you lose $42 million in annual revenue. Your board will ask why you let your largest customer walk away. Your workforce will suffer layoffs, and your reputation as the CEO who was brought in to save Holloway will be destroyed in your first year." The silence stretched between us. I could see him processing the options, weighing his pride against the reality of his situation. Finally, he sat back down at his desk. "What would this consulting arrangement look like?" he asked. 2 days a week on site for 60 days. I work with Kyle and your procurement team to identify critical supplier relationships that need personal attention. I help you build manual override protocols for situations where the automated system fails. I teach your team how to manage exceptions and escalations. And I provide weekly progress reports to Grantham documenting improvements. How much would you charge for this consulting work? I named a figure that was deliberately high but not unreasonable. Clayton flinched slightly but nodded. "And at the end of 60 days, you recommend that Grantham renew our contract?" "At the end of 60 days, I recommend whatever is supported by the data. If your performance is back to acceptable levels, I recommend renewal. If it is not, I recommend transition to alternative suppliers. My recommendation will be based on results, not on personal feelings." Clayton studied me for a long moment. Then he extended his hand across the desk. "You have a deal." I shook his hand, keeping my expression neutral. But inside, I felt a surge of satisfaction. Not just because I had gotten what I wanted, but because Clayton had been forced to admit, at least implicitly, that he needed the expertise he had thrown away. I started consulting at Holloway the following Monday. Kyle was relieved to have help, though he was clearly uncomfortable with the awkwardness of reporting to his former employee. The procurement team was even more uncomfortable. They were young, tech-focused, and suddenly being told to listen to someone they had watched get fired 2 months earlier. I ignored the discomfort and focused on work. I pulled reports on every late delivery and quality rejection. I identified patterns in the failures. I called suppliers directly and asked what had changed in their relationship with Holloway. The picture that emerged was exactly what I had expected. The automated system had destroyed trust by treating every transaction as identical, ignoring history and context, and failing to communicate proactively about potential problems. I spent 2 weeks rebuilding relationships, calling suppliers I had worked with for years, explaining that Holloway was fixing their systems, asking for patience and promising better communication going forward. Many suppliers were skeptical, but they trusted me, and they were willing to give Holloway another chance because I asked them to. The performance improvements were immediate. Delivery times dropped, quality rejections decreased. Customer service response times improved. Within 3 weeks, Holloway's metrics were approaching acceptable levels again. Clayton noticed the progress during our weekly review meetings. He was smart enough to see the correlation between my involvement and the improvements, but proud enough not to acknowledge it directly. "The system is starting to optimize correctly," he said during one meeting, as if the improvements had nothing to do with the hours I was spending on phone calls and relationship management. "The system is being supplemented by human judgment," I corrected, "which is what it needed from the beginning." The 60-day deadline arrived on a Tuesday in late April. I prepared a comprehensive performance report documenting every metric, every improvement, and every remaining concern. The data showed significant progress. Holloway was not back to their previous performance levels, but they were close enough that continuing the relationship was defensible. I presented the report to Patricia, James, and the Grantham executive team in their Chicago conference room. I walked them through the numbers methodically, showing where Holloway had improved and where they still had work to do. "Your recommendation?" Patricia asked when I finished. "Renew the contract for 1 year instead of 3, I said. "Maintain close oversight and monthly performance reviews. If they sustain these improvements for 12 months, we can discuss a longer-term renewal. If they backslide, we activate the transition plan to alternative suppliers." "That seems fair," James said. "They have earned another chance, but they need to prove they can maintain consistency." Patricia nodded. "I agree. Rose, excellent work on this. You salvaged a difficult situation and gave us good options going forward." But I was not done yet. "There is one more recommendation I want to make. I think Grantham should require Holloway to retain a full-time supply chain relationship manager as a condition of contract renewal. Someone with deep industry experience who can provide ongoing human oversight of their automated systems. Do you have someone specific in mind? Patricia asked, a small smile playing at her lips. I do, actually. There is a procurement professional who recently left Holloway. Very experienced, strong supplier relationships, exactly the kind of expertise they need. And would this person be willing to return to Holloway? Probably not as an employee, I said carefully, but possibly as a permanent consultant with guaranteed authority and contract provisions protecting their position. Patricia laughed. You want to write yourself into their contract as a mandatory consultant? I want to ensure that they do not make the same mistake twice, that they maintain the human expertise necessary to manage their supply chain effectively. If that means making my consulting role a contract requirement, then yes. That is a power play, James observed, though he did not sound disapproving. It is also good business, I replied. Grantham's production depends on reliable component supply. This ensures reliability. Patricia considered for a moment, then nodded. Included in the contract terms. Make it clear that ongoing procurement consulting from an approved industry expert is a requirement for contract renewal. If Clayton objects, he can walk away from $42 million. 2 days later, I sat in Holloway's conference room across from Clayton and Kyle. Between us on the table was the proposed 1-year contract renewal with all its terms and conditions. Clayton had been reading through it for 10 minutes, his expression growing darker with each page. This requires us to retain a procurement consultant, he said finally. It requires you to maintain appropriate human expertise in your supply chain management, I said. Given that your automated system still requires significant oversight. And you just happen to be available for this consulting role? I am the consultant Grantham has approved. You are welcome to propose alternatives, but they would need equivalent industry experience and established supplier relationships. Good luck finding someone with 32 years in manufacturing procurement who is available and willing to work with your organization. Clayton set the contract down and looked at me directly. You planned this. From the moment Grantham hired you, you planned to force your way back into this company. I planned to do my job, I said evenly, which was to ensure Grantham gets reliable component supply. The fact that doing my job well requires Holloway to retain expertise you should never have eliminated is not my fault. It is yours. You said this was not personal, that this was just business. It is business. You need what I provide. Grantham wants assurance that you can continue to provide it. This contract guarantees both things. Kyle shifted uncomfortably. Clayton, our performance has improved significantly since Rose started consulting. Maybe we should consider this requirement as a positive thing, a resource that helps us maintain quality. Clayton's jaw clenched, but he knew he was trapped. He could refuse the contract terms, but that meant losing Grantham's business and facing the consequences with his board. He could accept the terms and admit that the expertise he had discarded was actually essential. What are your consulting terms? He asked finally. I slid another document across the table. 2 days per week on site. Direct reporting relationship to Grantham on contract compliance matters. Authority to override automated procurement decisions when supplier relationships require personal attention. 3-year contract term aligned with potential future contract renewals. 3 years? Clayton said sharply. Grantham's current contract is 1 year with option to extend up to 3 years based on performance. If you want access to those extension options, you need to commit to maintaining appropriate expertise for the same period. He stared at the consulting contract for a long time. Then, without a word, he signed both documents and pushed them back across the table. Congratulations, Rose, he said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. You win. This was never about winning, I said, though we both knew that was not entirely true. This was about proving that experience and relationships still matter, that you cannot automate everything and expect the same results, that throwing people away has consequences. I stood and collected the signed contracts. Kyle walked me out, and at the door to the building, he stopped me. "That was brutal to watch," he said quietly. "He had it coming. You both did." "I know. For what it is worth, I am sorry. I should have fought harder to keep you when Clayton wanted to restructure." "You made your choice, Kyle. Now you get to live with it." I walked to my car, feeling lighter than I had in months. The signed contracts in my briefcase represented more than just job security or professional vindication. They represented proof that I had not been obsolete, that my knowledge and experience had real value, that throwing me away had been Clayton's mistake, not my failure. Over the following months, I watched Clayton struggle with the reality of his situation. He had wanted to be the visionary CEO who modernized a traditional company. Instead, he had become the cautionary tale about the limits of automation and the cost of dismissing expertise. His relationship with the board grew strained as they asked harder questions about his strategy. His grand plans for expansion had to be scaled back as he focused on stabilizing operations. Meanwhile, I rebuilt what he had broken. Supplier relationships improved, delivery performance stabilized, quality metrics returned to historical levels. And every week, when I sat in meetings reviewing progress, Clayton had to acknowledge that the improvements correlated directly with my involvement. The humiliation was not dramatic or explosive. It was steady and grinding. Every success I achieved was an implicit reminder of his failure. Every supplier who praised the improved communication was an indictment of his automated system. Every performance metric that exceeded targets was evidence that experience mattered more than algorithms. Within a year, 3 board members had quietly suggested to Clayton that perhaps he should consider transitioning to a different role. Perhaps somewhere his vision for automation would be better suited. Perhaps at a company that did not require deep supplier relationships and institutional knowledge. Clayton resigned 18 months after he had fired me. The official announcement praised his contributions and wished him well in future endeavors. The unofficial reality was that he had been pushed out after failing to deliver the transformation he had promised. Kyle took over as interim CEO and immediately made my consulting role permanent with expanded authority. As for me, I was exactly where I needed to be. Not as someone's disposable employee, but as an essential consultant with authority and respect. I was making more money than I ever had as an employee. I had autonomy and influence, and most importantly, I had proved that what I knew, and who I was, had value that no system could replicate. The morning Clayton's resignation was announced, I received a text from my daughter Lauren. "Mom, I am so proud of you. You showed them exactly what they lost." I smiled and typed back. "I showed them what happens when you confuse efficiency with wisdom. Some lessons are expensive." Sometimes revenge is not about dramatic confrontations or public humiliation. Sometimes it is about quietly, methodically proving that you were right all along. That the people who dismissed you made a mistake they would spend years trying to fix. That being thrown away does not mean you are worthless. It just means they failed to see your value. And sometimes the sweetest revenge is simply being proved right while they watch their mistake unfold in real time.